everybody is there, and let's start. Okay, bye.
Okay, very good. So let me share again my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, yes, the first slide. Perfect.
Okay, so welcome back. And this is second part of my talk. And so this is again work I've been doing with Deborah Principe, Onofrio Mazzarisi, Arola Akshay. You can find details on this on the archive on this paper. So the other paper you can also find it on the archive, not yet published. Okay. Okay. So so as I told you, essentially up to now, our perspective on sustainability has been very much related to our perspective on development and essentially the engine for development for say growth has been essentially economic profit essentially. So in economic theory, essentially the environment is considered as a part of the economy. Okay, and also, well, now more and more, also the population is being considered as part of the economy in the sense that it is a resource or say, as you know, I mean, we are all say goods for the social network. Say companies, okay? So a different perspective, I mean, or a more realistic perspective is to do with the fact that economics is only a part of what we do as a population, and Homo sapiens is only a part of nature, of the ecosystem, okay? And so essentially what I want to present is a little bit of a shift between these two different perspectives, which is essentially, I think is key for sustainability. Okay, so let me start again from very far. I mean, this is a very well-known quote from Adam Smith. And it is essentially saying, I mean, it's saying that it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Okay, so this is essentially saying that what is really enough and what has been enough for economic development is essentially self-interest. Okay, so it's greed, and this has led to create discipline in economics that is essentially based on this view of what makes people happy, which is essentially consumption. Okay, and this idea of utilitarianism has been mathematized, and it has been say promoted also in policy, and it has been celebrated by several people. So for good reasons. I mean, because essentially even so it has really say raised a lot of say people out of poverty. So. And so Paul Samuelson says that the beauty of general equilibrium system, which is the theory that describes this economic equilibrium based on utilitarianism, is that it shows under a certain assumption that selfish behavior can lead to socially desirable outcomes. And this is essentially the content of the welfare theorems in economics that are essentially based on the fact that, say, if firms optimize their profit, consumers optimize their consumption, and markets match demand and supply, essentially you achieve optimal allocations. And this type of insight has been extended by the expansion of financial markets to provide optimal allocation also across time and to cope with risk. Okay, so this is, say, for example, what I mean by this, if you think about insurance, an insurance contract is something that allows you to cope with the risk in an uncertain future time, at an uncertain future time. And the interesting thing about this is that all this theory essentially assumes that individuals and firms, they solve this optimization problem in isolation. There is no need for social interaction, for interaction between people. And people just can just interact with markets, with prices, and in order to satisfy their own well-being. Okay, so to maximize their utility. Okay, and we know that this is more and more true because of say electronic markets nowadays that are allowing really to say buy and sell what we need without having to interact with anyone. So the theory of economics that instead deals with, say, strategic interaction, where people really interact with each other, is game theory. And it is the theory that aims at predicting how people will behave in certain particular circumstances. Okay, so one particular example, which is very well known, is the prisoner's dilemma. So I will just remind you of what this is. So you have two persons here, Bonnie and Clyde, that are caught by the police, and they are accused of a certain crime, and both of them, they are interrogated separately, and they may either confess or not confess. If they confess, they will charge the other person to be guilty of the crime. And if the other person does not confess, then they will walk free. But if the other person also confess, they will both spend a lot of time in prison. Okay. And the question is, what should these two people do? I mean, here I'm taking this particular example of two people that also care about each other. They should care about each other. There are other cases of game theory, coordination games, or cases also which deal with global, say, common good problems. For example, vaccination. So if everybody is vaccinated for a certain disease, then there is no risk. The risk of getting this disease is negligible because you are vaccinated and because there are no people who will get infected. You can think, okay, so if everybody is vaccinated, why should I get vaccinated if the chance of getting the disease is very small? And so, but if everybody thinks like this, then nobody will get vaccinated. Okay, so this is formalized in game theory, and game theory is a branch of economics where essentially you describe the behavior of people as being, I mean, the choice of people as being a choice of a strategy. And depending on which strategy one chooses and the other choose, then there will be a certain payoff. And you assume that the behavior that you should observe is the one that maximizes your own payoff, assuming that also others maximize their payoff. Okay, so for example, for two players, you can think of this particular situation where there are player one can either play top, medium, or bottom. Player two can either play the strategy L, left, center, or right. And these are the payoff. So the first number is the payoff that player one would get, and the second number is the payoff that player two would get. Okay. So in this case, it is easy to see what will be the outcome, because you just can say, given what player two, if player two plays L, then player one will play 5 M, okay, and get this, okay. And so you can find out what is the best response of each of the two players, and find what is the common, I mean, what is the equilibrium where each of them play their best strategy, okay. So this is the Nash equilibrium. And okay, so when you apply to a prisoner's dilemma, which is the problem I told you before, what you find is that in spite of the fact that there are socially optimal outcomes, if both people would not confess, they would spend just a few time in prison. But if any of them assumes that the other will not confess, then it will be convenient for them to confess, in spite of what the other does, essentially. And so this means that in the end, the Nash equilibrium in this game is this one, where they both confess. And this is it's a much worse outcome than the outcome if they didn't confess. Okay, so this is one particular, say, insight of game theory. Okay, so for example, this insight led to this field of to this to this field in game theory, which aimed at showing why is it that instead we see so much cooperation in society. Okay, so everywhere you look, you see people that not behaving as the prisoner's dilemma would suggest. You see people cooperating, and this also has been very influential. So this is so there are different reasons for which this may happen, and this is a paper where you can find some of them. But even the fact that you consider something which is so pervasive in society, like cooperation, as a paradox, is sort of say strange. I mean, okay, so a game which is more relevant for sustainability is what is called the tragedy of the commons. And the story goes as follows. So there are N farmers, each sharing a common land to have their sheep to graze. And the question is, how many sheep should each farmer have? Okay, so, and the idea is that the payoff of each farmer is proportional to the number of sheep times the value of that they will make it by each of them. Okay, now this means that each farmer will try to have as many sheep as possible, but the problem is that the value of this V of S is a decreasing function, because the more this value depends on the total number of ships. And if there are many ships, then the plot will be overgrazed, and and the value will be very small. So if you work out what is the Nash equilibrium in this case, you find exactly this. So that if there are many farmers, so they will they will get a number of sheep which is very large, close to the limit where the value of each sheep is very small, because the common resource will be depleted. Okay. Okay, so there are a lot of other, say, quite disturbing predictions of game theory that essentially have also been promoted to policy, and and this type of say rationalization of what is the optimal behavior for humans actually produces a world which is a little bit scary. I mean, so where, let's say, retaliation and deterrence and deception are sort of rational outcomes. Okay. Now, there is a lot of evidence that, however, that this behavior, this picture of how humans behave, of Homo sapiens, is not very accurate. Okay. And so, for example, there is this anthropologist who have studied this economies in primitive, not, let's say, not primitive, but say indigenous cultures, and many of them were based on gifts. I mean, the fact of this practice of giving gifts to others as a way of raising a reputation. Okay, and this, I mean, this Marcel Mauss gives quite interesting account of these practices, like the potluck, where essentially individuals give essentially all their belongings to others, give away everything to others in these big parties and etc. So there is also this observation by Putnam in 1993 that led to the definition of, or to the notion of social capital. So social capital is something that should not exist, but it's essentially the observation that if you look at economic performance in regions where there is more social cohesion, then you see that economic performance is higher when people interact more. And for example, he was looking at North Italy and looking at economic growth as a function of how many choirs or how many, say, society of, say, voluntary that were present in that region. It was consistently finding that these two things were correlated. So the more social interaction there was, the higher was the economic performance. And then, well, there are people that have shown that essentially cooperation is not a puzzle, but is something which is, is normal in communities, especially in, in communities which are, say, agricultural communities where people have to share common resources. There is a lot of evidence in experimental economics by say economists really doing experiment by asking people, putting people in a setting, in a game theoretic setting, giving them all the information of this on the payoffs, with the real payoff, real money being given. And consistently, what they found is that the people are not playing optimal strategy. They are not playing Nash equilibrium strategies. There is a lot of evidence, both from neuroscience and evolutionary sciences, on the origin of altruism. Say, for example, we have a specific neural hardware for caring for others. Part of it is really, say, in our limbic system, which is the more, say, ancestral part of our neural hardware. Part of it is in the more, evolved part of the brain, which is the cortex. And this, this neural hardware really provides us a reward for caring for others, or for, say, even both positively and negatively. Okay, so all of this evidence says that almost this description of utilitarian model for human beings is not really accurate. And so there has been a lot of research in also in modeling approaches trying to address these people, introduce the fact that people care for others. And in most of the cases, what people have done, and in all of the cases, what people have done is to say, well, okay, so the strategy, the behavior of an individual will be what maximizes his own payoff, his own utility, but also he will care to some extent about others, okay? And in some cases, this how much they care about others is just fixed, and these models are used just to fit experimental results in experimental economics. In some cases, these, like in this paper by Alger and Weibel, this coefficient alpha is an evolutionary. It's determined by an evolutionary process. And say, for example, these people find that in evolutionary process, in this type of models, you can have the evolution of what are called Kantian preferences. So the fact that you adopt strategies that you would like to be adopted by everyone. Okay. Okay. So now what we do. So what we do is inspired by going back to what we started from Adam Smith. You remember this was the butcher that we discussed. And now, if you, the same Adam Smith, almost 20 years before, also wrote a different book, which was on the theory of moral sentiments. And what he was saying is that essentially people care about others. So, because this, I mean, the fact that to make other people happy, make them also happy. Okay, so what he said is, I mean, you can read this sentence. Okay, so what we try to do is to put this sentence into mathematics, I mean, to formalize this sentence. And actually, as Antonio was saying, there is a whole branch of economy, which is essentially the civil economy, that was stepping from these premises, essentially, and it was seeing essentially economy as a mean to foster, say, good virtues in society, like trust, etc., etc. Okay, and however, this theory, I mean, this civil economy, was never formalized, and actually, it didn't have much impact in political economy and in the policy that was implemented. Okay. So yes, what we try to do is to say, okay, so let's try to put this sentence into mathematics. And this is our definition of what we call homophilics. Okay. So these homophilics individuals of the species are individuals that maximize a function that we call happiness. And this happiness is, and essentially, yes, they maximize this happiness, assuming that others also maximize their happiness. But this happiness now depends on their payoff, on their profit, how much they get, but also they may depend on the happiness of others. Okay. And how much each individual I cares about individual J is given by this Pij, and this Pij is determined by essentially maximizing happiness. Okay, so people care about others to the extent that it makes them happier. Okay, and of course, caring about others goes to the detriment of one's own profit. Okay, so if you care about others, so this Q is also increasing in the absolute value of Pij, because essentially both caring about others positively or negatively, it means to it implies a sacrifice. Okay. Okay, so here are some general consequences of this definition. First of all, what you find out is that this happiness is an emergent collective property. Okay, so in the sense that the happiness of individual I is related to the welfare or the payoff of all the individuals that is connected directly or indirectly. Okay, and the key thing is this matrix Bij, which is essentially the inverse of 1 minus the matrix P. Okay, and of course, so this matrix B is essentially the matrix P plus the matrix P squared plus P cube, etc., etc. Okay, so there's essentially, so the first thing is that so this happiness as this collective is a collective object. Second thing is that this happiness entails some notion of reciprocity, in the sense that the coefficient, I mean, say, how much your happiness depends on Pij, depends first on this coefficient Bii, which is essentially an extended norm, an extended notion of reciprocity, in the sense that it depends on how much you care about others and others caring about you, and third order contact. So it depends on the whole network, essentially. But it also depends on the difference between the happiness of others and your payoff. So this tells you that individual I will tend to care more about people who are happier than what they would do, than what they would be by being selfish. Okay, so this tells you an interesting thing, that essentially the people with the smaller payoff will be the ones who are more altruistic. They will care more about others. The ones who are richer, they will care about less about others. Okay, which is also something that is sort of interesting, no? And okay, so the other interesting thing is that at least in this model, there is no equilibrium with negative PIJ. So negative PIJ would imply what is called spiteful behavior, so that you are happy if someone is unhappy, essentially. And this is interesting because this model that we are using, where essentially your happiness depends on the happiness of others, essentially entails some, the fact that your subject, you encompass in your subjective, in yourself, also the others. So you have an expanded self. So, and this is typical of, empathic concern, typical of empathic, and this is typically something that has to do with caring. Caring for others is based on empathy, essentially, and on this expanded self. Whereas if you spiteful behavior is usually related to an objectified other. So they would correspond to a model where instead of the happiness, you would have the payoff here. Okay, so let's see. These are general results. Let's see what happens in specific cases. So this is, for example, the prisoner's dilemma. So in the prisoner's dilemma, what happens is that, well, you could think of these are two-player games. So if the initial prosociality of agent 2 is, say, 40%, then essentially there is a region where both players would, in the end, not confess, okay, where they would cooperate, and they will get this outcome, which is the outcome that is most socially optimal. If instead the initial predisposition for altruism is low, then or the cost of cooperation is high, then you would get back to the Nash equilibrium. And there are also asymmetric equilibrium where essentially one of the players confesses and while the other does not confess. Okay, and this type of behavior is similar. So that people do something which is is against their own self-interest because they care about others. It's something that okay, so we relate it to this Stockholm syndrome, which is when hostages are taken and they care for their, say, for those who are, say, taking them. So this is another example. Let me just discuss. This is Ultimatum game is a game which has been discussed by many people. So the game is the following. So you have two players. One player is given a cake, and he has to split the cake in two parts. One part that he gives to the other player, and the rest he keeps for himself. So his strategy is what is the fraction of the cake that he will give to the other. Okay, and the other player can either accept or refuse. Okay, and so in most of the cases, what you see, so the Nash equilibrium would be that essentially the one who proposes just gives like infinitesimal fraction of the cake to the other, and the other accepts because an infinitesimal fraction is better than nothing. Okay, what you see in practice in experiments is that people essentially refuse whatever is below, say, 40 or 30%. Okay, and this is also what you see here. Essentially, you see that there is a phase where essentially the proposal proposes a large part. Here is one, and the one who judges accepts. Okay, so here are other examples. I will not go into the details, but the bottom line is that what you see is that under this new perspective, there are many more equilibria that are possible. Okay, and so this is so I'm saying this because the emphasis of economists in the last say half century or say since the work of Nash has been the one of reducing the number of Nash equilibria so as to make Nash equilibria game theory a predictive theory that could provide a single prediction. And so here we see the opposite, so that the number of possible outcomes are more than the number of Nash equilibria. Okay, so this is probably the most interesting outcome. So here is a game which is essentially a common good game in which essentially every agent, every player can decide whether to contribute to take SI equal to 1 or not to contribute to take SI equal to 0. And the payoff they get is how much people in their neighborhood contribute minus the cost of their own contribution, plus eventually some, some term, okay? And so here we study the case where essentially the agents have a, so they have a generic prosociality. So they apply a level of prosociality which is the same across all agents, okay? So this is what we get in an homogeneous population. So in an homogeneous population, what you get is that if everybody, so if you start with a certain initial condition for the prosociality of agents, those who are above a certain threshold will become fully prosocial. Those who are below a certain threshold will become selfish. So this one will be the one who contribute, and these one are those who do not contribute. So it means that if you have just one person which is prosocial, then you will just have one prosocial person. Now, however, the interesting thing is what happens when you have a heterogeneous population. if you have an heterogeneous population, then what happens is that after a transient, even if you start with only one prosocial agent, at the end, everybody will become prosocial but one. And this one is usually the one who will be the richest one, okay? And and this is this behavior, we observe it also on a random graph. So if you have a random graph and you follow these dynamics, what you find is that in the end, the player which is the richest in the sense, in this case, is the one who has more links to neighbors, will be the one that becomes selfish, and all the others will become altruistic. Okay, so let me finish by saying what happens in the tragedy of the commons. So, as I told you, this is the game. So the strategy is how many ships each of these farmers take, and the payoff is essentially related to is proportional to the number of ships times the value of each of these ships. That is a decreasing function of the total number of ships. And as I told you, in the Nash equilibrium, you end up in this very, in this equilibrium where the plot is essentially depleted. Okay. So what happens if you assume that instead agents care about others, so they can care about others? Then what you see is that essentially in this pro-social equilibrium, you find something in between the social optimum and the Nash equilibrium. And what you find is that some of these agents, some of these players, will just choose not to have any ship at all. Okay, so they will just avoid playing this game. Okay, and so this is essentially the strategies of the players. So there is here you will see that in a community of 100 people, there will be 30 people that will not play at the end. Okay, so this is it. So there are a lot of limitations and comments and extensions possible of this framework. So one idea of this model is that what you assume is that agents can observe the happiness of others. They cannot observe their wealth. This is essentially in line with the fact that, well, we also, as a species, we have ways in which we make our emotional state visible, okay? And so there is this trade-off between the own payoff and others' happiness that can be generalized, and there is reciprocity, reputation, and fairness. These are all things that have been discussed in the economic literature, and one can think of seeing whether they emerge endogenously. There is the issue of spiteful preferences. So under what model one would observe these spiteful preferences? And and then, well, there are other extensions which are possible. Okay, so let me finish with a summary before leaving some space for discussion. So what I try to discuss is a model, a better model for how humans behave. And this model assumes that individuals, they try to maximize happiness. That is, that depends on their own profit, but also may depend on the happiness of others, insofar as it brings them more happiness, or it makes them more happy. And so what we find is that this happiness is an emergent social property that, so this model has some endogenous reciprocity, that essentially what you find is that the way in which altruism is adapted is related to relative standing. And this factor is also something which is well known in economics, that people do not care about absolute wealth, they care about relative wealth. And we find that the poor cares for the rich, whereas the rich does not care for the poor, which is also something that aligns with empirical observations. We find that there are situations where individuals spontaneously care about those who are making them worse off. Well, we have this, we called it Jesus Christ theorem, which is essentially this observation that you need just one prosocial individual in some circumstances to make everybody to be prosocial and altruistic. And also we have that, say, in a problem of common goods, then you avoid overexploitation by having agents that escape the competition. Yes, so the final comment is that, yes, we live in a world which is not built for homophilics, but is designed and built with institutions and laws that are designed for Homo economicus. And this is essentially what also impacts the way we behave to a large extent. And so this is it. So if you want more details, you can find it in this preprint. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Matteo. Thank you very much for your talk. Okay. Questions? Because we are seeing in this period a lot of consequences of getting in an homo economicus state of mind, because this guides a lot the decision that individuals but also states take. Because if you, yeah, Yuri, right?
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. I learned a lot. I tried to write down some expressions and some sentences. I like it very much. The question is, in one of his books, Yuval Noah Harari, he wrote also about happiness. At least the first chapter is full about happiness. And I thought you will touch it here. Maybe what he wrote there is hidden here. That's the sense of my question. He gives the following definition. He says that the happiness is the difference between what one expects and what one gets. Say the beggar expects to get, 1 dime, and he gets 2 dimes and he is happy. And then the millionaire expects to get tomorrow $500,000 and he gets, $10 and he is not happy. When you wrote about extensions of your approach, might it be included here, or maybe it is hidden somewhere here and I oversaw it?
No, yes, no, this is a very good comment, very interesting comment. Indeed, there are is a very simplified model. So, for example, you could also think. So, in this Harari notion of happiness, there is a sense of a dynamic happiness being dynamic in the sense that it depends on what you expect with respect to what you get, and so there is also another definition of happiness, which is related to value creation. So the fact that your creativity, I mean, you express your creativity, and essentially, and this is a very interesting notion, is due to educator in Japan. It's called Makiguchi, Tsunesaburo Makiguchi. He has this value creation theory, where he says that value has three components. One is beauty, one is gain. So one is essentially aesthetic, is nice. And one is gain, which is what makes, what supports life, essentially. And one is essentially good. I mean, good is value for the others. And so happiness is to create happiness in either of these, is create value in either of these three ways. So, for example, an artist would be happy or satisfied by creating a piece of art that, or say a doctor would be happy by saving a life, for example. So there are many ways in which this can be extended. So the way you suggest also would imply having this dynamic view where essentially the future is a random, is related to random outcomes. Mm-hmm. So, but again, I would say that this notion of Harari, it's an individual notion. It does not entail your interaction with others.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. I see Reinhard Holk has a question. Antonio.
Reinhard, oh, sorry, the microphone muted. Reinhard.
I have a question which concerns the applicability of all these models. I thought these models are in some sense global models. So you have a community of people who may be happy or unhappy. But I think if you look at the global situation, and just as we have it, we have countries where people are unhappy and others maybe are happy, but not they decide what it's done, but they have leaders. And in fact, the global situation depends on only a few people and not on a statistical ensemble of peoples where happiness or unhappiness can work. I mean, even in a country, it doesn't work because you have elections and half of them are happy and half of them are unhappy. But then they have a leader which is just, well, depends on something. Okay. You understand, it's not a statistical thing.
No, I mean, okay, so first of all, the way in which I think about this model is not very much as a model that is really can be applied in a real situation, but it's more of a different way of thinking about, say, economic phenomena. Okay, so let me come to your particular example. Okay, So, so if you have a model like this, if you have a model like like this, where the happiness of your happiness may depend on the happiness of others.
Yeah.
So you may have a situation where I will vote for a candidate in the election because I care about him, because I have an emotional attachment to this candidate. And if he gets elected, he will be more happy, and then I will be more happy. In spite of the fact that I can also argue that if he will be elected, my payoff will be smaller. Okay, so this I call, well, maybe I can say it here, I call it the Trump theorem. Okay, so the fact that, say, in real life, we see this phenomena that essentially people do not do what is in their own best interest if you consider the best interest in terms of payoff.
Mhm.
They do their what is in their best interest with respect to another function, which we call happiness, that in some case maybe is just related to the happiness of others, and it goes at the material detriment of themselves. I don't know if that. Then of course, I mean, this is
a personal effect, whereas
yeah.
the other one is a, let's say, social effect, and maybe there are some other effects which can lead to a result of an election, for instance.
Yes, yes, yeah. I mean, this factor, why that that you see so often. I mean, in mature democracy, we call mature people who are elected, who are clearly, say, not skilled. I mean, they have no, say, political background. They are completely naive, and you know they are going to do just their own self-interest. And vote for them because their self-interest, I mean, is related to happiness, because if they get more happy, you are more happy. So this is what theory would predict.
Thank you. Thank you.
Matteo, I have a comment. Yes. Oh, sorry. Reinhard still? No, okay. Matteo, I have a comment. Regarding what you just said, from my perception, or also having been in the States, that it's still your model, but in which the unhappiness of others counts more. Because one can vote for Trump because he's just pissed off by the way Democrats have been behaving for years. So the point is also one should not assume a kind of an homogeneous, you say, utility function, because one of the problems I find in the utility function that they are first, normally they are all the same for everybody, but then they can change in time, and then they are also context dependent. So, for example, in this election, often I vote against the other. Depends on the culture of the place, on the kind of election. So I think one should be more flexible about this, but I think the most important part is that, as you said, economicus, so that the people who take decisions think is in terms of the old utility in which they don't have a good model of man, so they don't take a decision that would make a real man, a real homo happy, but an Homo economicus happy. Since none of us is an Homo economicus, we are all unhappy because they have the wrong way of thinking.
Yeah. But yes, so let me again reiterate the fact that this theory or this perspective is a perspective that rationalizes, I think, some behavior or some phenomena that we see in the real world, not quantitatively but qualitatively. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, say, for example, if you think about the narrative, you were mentioning the Democrats, or you were mentioning, I mean, you can mention, I mean, generally the left parties, etc. They try to argue rationally. They try to argue rationally, assuming that people care only about profit. Okay, that's not. That they are assuming the wrong model for people, and this is not assuming that people are irrational. I mean, irrationality does not have anything to do. I mean, in the end, the whole point is that if you want to have a mathematical theory of how people behave, in some sense, you should think that they are maximizing some function, that they are optimizing something. Okay, everybody is optimizing something all the time. No? And the point I'm making here is that what people optimize is not an individual. I mean, does not depend on just the individual. It's a more. It takes into account. It can take into account also other people. Then, of course, you're right. I mean, reality is much more complex. There is time. There is also. I mean, this model is also very simplistic, etc., etc. But at least it rationalizes some phenomena which otherwise I would not explain. I mean, with the okay.
Good. Other questions? Okay. So, do we call a day? Yuri, do you want to close these lectures?
Yes, so before closing the Ising lectures, closing this session, I want to thank the speaker and thank the chairperson and also the speakers of today.